Hello, everyone. It's great to have you again for another podcast of ours. And if you've been tuning in and you like the kind of content we share here, I want to encourage you to go over to amazic.com. And we have a lot more like these podcasts, and we have articles, we have event coverage, we have job listings. There's a whole lot of stuff happening. So head over to amazic.com. I'm Twain Taylor, the editor at amazic.com. And we have with us today Grant Gumina. He is the Director of Product Management at Upbound. And we're going to be having a great conversation today on just what Upbound does in the Kubernetes space. So Grant, it's great to have you here with us.
Hey, thank you so much, Twain. Really excited to talk with you and your audience about some of the cool stuff we're doing at Upbound.
Awesome. And yeah, about talking about stuff at Upbound, I just visited the website and I saw that you guys just recently completed your, 100% coverage of all three major cloud providers. So congrats on that. And, what does that mean for your customers?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We're super proud of the work, obviously, we've done and really excited about what we can do for customers with it. The thing to kind of remember, or just to kind of understand first, is Upbound is sort of like a platform for building platforms using control planes. And I think we'll get into this a little bit later, but basically, the fundamental idea is customers use Upbound to build their own cloud platform on top of all their existing infrastructure and services that they're using. And that has a lot of benefits, and there's a bunch of interesting stuff there. And so since we launched, we actually had support for most of the major big three cloud providers, but there were some gaps. And now, thanks to some really clever work we did actually with the Crossplane community, which is an open source project we founded and invented and donated to the CNCF, we actually added way more cloud provider support, as well as 100% resource coverage in all the major hyperscale cloud providers. So end result is customers can build better, deeper platforms with the control planes that the Upbound platform gives them.
That's awesome. Wow. I want to know, so which came first? Was Crossplane first or was Upbound first?
That's a really good question. I think so. It kind of happened at the same time. Okay. Upbound, the company started late 2017, like very late 2017. And then Crossplane, the open source project, was open sourced in 2018. We donated it to the CNCF in about, I think, 2020. And then shortly thereafter, we became Crossplane, I should say, rather, became an incubating project.
Awesome. Wow. That's interesting. So yeah, so talking about, like you mentioned briefly, when the platform model. So, the first time I came across it was in this, the State of DevOps report, quite a popular report. And they are big on this idea of the platform model. And I love all the stats that they give, and it's pretty much like, there is a lot of consensus around this idea. But, it's quite different. The platform model is quite new in many ways. And, previously how developers would, get access to the resources they need was very different, raising a ticket, walking up to IT, bribing them, all of that. But, it's totally changing now with the platform model. And could you tell us about this change and what does it mean? What's the platform model?
Yeah, well, I think it's a great question, and it depends on who you ask, right? But I think if you ask customers, like fundamentally, every organization we talk to and work with, is investing in various different initiatives, sometimes platforms, sometimes not, to do one thing, which is they want to make their customers happier by giving them new products, new features faster. And I think like this platform model, a big component of it is, the ability to self-service, right? And so the ability to self-service infrastructure and also have a single pane of glass for management, right? And the idea behind self-service that I've seen and why customers are adopting a platform model is that, if the people building your application, so your developers, can get access to the tools that they need faster without red tape and negotiation and tickets and emails, then they'll be able to iterate on applications more quickly and ultimately, ship faster. And so I think there's a emerging trend or body of work in the industry. Like maybe it's just like I don't know if it's more than a meme, because there's like real customers are talking about it, called like platform engineering. And, when we see and talk with customers, and they tell us about the platform, they'll say something like, hey, we are literally trying to build our own version of AWS. Like we are literally trying to build our own cloud platform. Like they want something that looks and feels like the AWS Cloud Console in their environment for their customers and, you know, internal like users and everything, but they don't want the services to be EKS, RDS, and VPCs. Instead, they want to actually define, well, what is Kubernetes at my company? What is a database? What is networking? And what should those be for my company, my teams, and even, you know, potentially their customers? And so, you know, they're motivated to do this, to build these internal cloud platforms, because, you know, they want to give a sort of paved road self-service experience to developers to deploy their apps to production without that red tape and faster, because that results in happier customers. And then simultaneously, they're trying to give their operators like a single meta like pane of glass to see in real time all the resource usage in across infrastructure environments, vendor relationships, on-prem, cloud, edge, wherever, in order to reduce the cloud spend, make more intelligent business decisions about, you know, procuring new services or signing new contracts. And in order to do that, you have to have like a layer in between all those infrastructure environments and then the people that use them. And that's the platform, right? That is what they're trying to do. And I think from our perspective at Upbound, building one of these things is like super, super hard. Like it's really, really hard to do by yourself. You know, first of all, you have to build one, right? Like you can't actually buy something off the shelf that sits between like your mainframe, your Amazon environment, and maybe like the GCP environment, you know, someone created via shadow IT, and that's where like a mission critical app is or whatever, right? You know, there are some products out there that kind of do this, like, you know, Google has Anthos, there's Arc from Azure, there's, you know, OpenShift, Tanzu, other things that provide, you know, claim to provide like a single pane of glass and a great experience for app developers. But, you know, from our perspective, they kind of have like in a very opinionated perspective about infrastructure that works with the platform. You know, so you have to kind of be all in on one vendor or another, or you don't get the benefits of the platform. And then they also have a really opinionated perspective on the abstractions or APIs people use to self-serve the infrastructure. So if you want to use like a different version of Kubernetes in your platform, and you don't like, let's say I want Kubernetes from, you know, Giant Swarm or someone, and I don't want it to be GKE, or I want a different service mesh other than Istio in my platform. If you change those things, you lose out on all the benefits that they give you. So buying a platform off the shelf is kind of like a non-starter for customers. And so they're left to like build one themselves. And the problem we saw at Upbound was there's really no unifying or common approach to building a platform. There isn't a community, or wasn't a community, for sharing best practices. And, you know, again, the solutions vendors offered didn't meet the needs of customers. And so that motivated us to invent the Crossplane project, because our key insight, you know, our backgrounds at Upbound before, you know, the company was started, was building the company DNA. The founders of the company had a lot of experience building hyperscale cloud computing environments prior to starting Upbound. And the key insight was the way Azure works, the way AWS works, the way GCP works, is they're all architected around a control plane. And we feel like a control plane is like the missing component that customers have, or our customers are missing, or they're lacking in their sort of efforts to build their own platform. And, you know, so that's why we realized, like, in order for customers to win, there needed to be an open source framework and community and vendor neutral space.
You know, actually, I want to get to this part of Crossplane in just a bit. But before that, just setting up kind of the, you know, the problem, you know, that we're trying to solve with Crossplane and Upbound and all of that. And to that end, I want to just dig a little bit into what you were talking about just before this, which is you're talking about how, you know, it's, you know, for developers, it's the self-service developer experience. And then for, the operators, it's a different benefit, them being able to enable that. But you're also talking about that you don't buy it, you build it. And, so I want to ask about, in terms of selling this concept for you as, cross-play and Upbound, and also from, customers' point of view, just buying into this new idea. Because typically when you talk to the ops team, they don't want to build something new that's complex and that spans the whole organization, which is pretty much what this is. So, I was just wanting you to share a bit about what's it like selling something like this, and just getting buy-in for this, and what's it from the customer side, just being able to commit to it.
Well, the beauty of all of this is that we really don't have to sell or convince the customers of this approach, because they already recognize, like the platform teams already will tell you, we're already doing this. They're already actively, working on, platform related or self-service related initiatives. And a lot of times they have different names. Like sometimes there's the initiative that's been ongoing for like 9 years to model everything as infrastructure as code. And then there's like a team that maintains the Jenkins pipeline that deploys it and, manages all the complex like workflow logic in the pipeline to make sure things get deployed correctly. And then there's like teams that are focused on providing Kubernetes clusters on demand. And then there's a team that's doing another thing. And then there's usually the team that we encounter that's trying to figure out like, well, we kind of have like bits and pieces of this platform working. How do we actually unify all of that and consolidate it? And and that's when honestly those teams discover that Crossplane project, right? Because it solves it provides that sort of open framework for incorporating containers and Kubernetes and IAC, not even IAC, but declarative infrastructure management and continuous reconciliation all in one package. And then, what Upbound does is kind of gives them the turnkey solution and production ready control planes, and as well as a bunch of other components that they can use to like build their entire platform on.
That's interesting. So where do you think, these customers are getting primed on this idea? Are they looking at others around and saying, hey, these guys are doing it? Or are they going to conferences and hearing, hey, this sounds interesting, let me try? Where do you think this is coming from?
That's a really good question. I mean, prior to my experience here at Upbound, I'd worked at, Microsoft and other like big companies in the past. And for a long time, the hyperscalers have been, if you worked there as a developer or an engineer, you had a way to very quickly get databases or new dev environments or resources without actually like talking to central IT or anything like that. And so those companies have, and like a lot of like really modern advanced software engineering companies have been operating in this model for a long time. And I think you're totally right. Like, you go to a DevOps or software engineering conference and you see a demo of how things are done. It's given everyone else in the industry a lot of ideas on how they can run their business. The other thing too is like every company is becoming a tech company. If you weren't a tech company 10 years ago, you are now. And if you're a tech company, you have to be a cloud company. And if you're a cloud company, the people building those digital products and cloud experiences have to be able to operate at that scale and at that speed other cloud companies are operating at. And so there's a huge business need to figure out how to ship products and experiences faster to customers in order to stay ahead of the curve and, win customer business.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah. And, talking about like just the dev and the ops team, a few years ago, there was a lot of talk about breaking silos between these teams with the whole DevOps movement and all of that. But now, along with the platform model, I think one point that I hear coming out clearly is that there's also a need for separation of concerns between the two teams and, not making the two teams to get in the way of each other. And I think the platform model actually, is a great balance between these two concepts. Would you agree with that? And, could you talk a bit more on just how the platform model really, is a good balance?
Yeah, for sure. I think there might be separation of concerns is actually a concept that comes from computer science. And I think in like architectural or engineering principles, and I think sometimes it's interpreted or perceived by people without that background as like, oh, it means division of labor. It means like there's a firewall between two groups and you just focus on your part and you focus on your part and you never talk to each other. And that's actually not really the way it works. Like I actually think of separation of concerns from an API perspective, right? Like in computer science, the best way to get two entities to work well together that are distinct and separate is by defining a protocol or defining an API that allows them to come together with a contract. And what a platform effectively does by sitting in between infrastructure, applications, and the teams that build them is allows both developers and operators to come together and work together with like a contract or like an API. All the developer has to do is submit a request and for what they want, and the platform, having been defined and curated by those operators, the platform gives them a response back, gives them the thing that they want, as long as it meets certain requirements and parameters that have been defined.
Okay, really interesting. I think that really sets up, what we're trying to solve with this, platform model and all of that. I'd like to spend some time just going into a bit about Crossplane and how it does this, and a bit about Upbound and what it adds to that as well. So, if you could talk a bit about just Crossplane and just how it solves, this problem of running Kubernetes clusters on multi-cloud systems, because that's what everyone wants to do today. And if you could give us sort of how Crossplane actually solves this problem, that would be great to start off with.
Yeah, so I think it might be helpful too to think about Crossplane as it really is more of a framework for building a control plane and less about like deploying or running, something in production. So what Crossplane allows you to do is define a control plane for your operators and developers, right? And using Crossplane, you can define, for example, like what Kubernetes is for your company. You can present a really simple interface to your developers that says, here, submit a request. All you have to do is name your cluster. Tell us whether or not you want it to be fast, whether it's slow for development, or whether you want it to be like cheap, and what cloud provider you want to run the cluster on. Submit the request to Crossplane, and Crossplane will provision that infrastructure. Now, it sounds like magic. It kind of is to a developer, right? The interesting part is kind of what's happening behind the scenes on the control plane. And so what Crossplane and control planes in general allow your operators to do is basically define that custom API. So I just talked about the interface. There's a bunch of logic and on the back end of that interface that the operators define, which specify like, this is how the Kubernetes cluster is going to do networking. This is how many nodes you're going to have. We're going to present the option that says fast cluster, slow cluster, or cheap cluster. And, these are the specific specifications that around networking, node count, resource groups, et cetera, that the cluster is going to adhere to or have when that's sort of requested. I don't know if that answers your question exactly. We can get into like how Crossplane works at a really technical level, but I also don't want to jump super deep real quick.
But I just wanted to get a little bit more. I get that, API seems to be the key concept here. But in terms of like defining these configurations and all of that, how do you do it? Are there files you define them in, or is there some other way?
So Crossplane is really interesting in the sense where it is built on top of the Kubernetes API. The way it works is you basically install Crossplane into a Kubernetes cluster, and then Crossplane extends the Kubernetes API. So Kubernetes actually has a really amazing like operating model for that is built and architected around a lot of these same concepts like separation of concerns, declarative infrastructure management, continuous reconciliation, etc. But the API of Kubernetes by default only knows about things like pods, containers, deployments. It's all about one use case, which is application and container orchestration, right? What Crossplane did was recognize that you could take that same operating model and extend it to things outside the cluster. And so Crossplane actually adds through a technology, and we can get into it maybe later, like called custom resource definitions, adds different types into your Kubernetes cluster, extends the API, and all of a sudden you can orchestrate buckets and RDS and EC2, as well as your own types that you define, like Grant's database, Grant's network, whatever else it might be, the same way you would orchestrate an application or like a pod or something like that.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, I'd like if you could just, since you mentioned it already and brought up CRDs, just what are CRDs and how does Crossplane leverage CRDs?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So CRDs are, well, what they stand for, first of all, is like custom resource definition. And it's actually a really interesting, innovative technology in Kubernetes. So fundamentally, like one of the design principles around CRDs in Kubernetes was this idea that Kubernetes was going to allow users to extend its API. So it has a really powerful like type system. Every resource has like a RESTful path and interface in it already. And the idea behind custom resource definitions is, well, why don't we allow users to define new types in the Kubernetes cluster? And when a new CRD is added or installed into a cluster, the Kubernetes API server creates like a new RESTful path for that resource type. What that really means is like when you have that RESTful path, now the users or of the Kubernetes cluster can create custom objects of that type using the Kubernetes API, if you want to get like into it. What Crossplane does is Crossplane adds CRDs to your Kubernetes cluster by installing packages we call providers, kind of like Terraform providers. Conceptually the same thing. And providers contain definitions or CRDs for things like buckets and databases and compute. Basically, think of like go to the Amazon Cloud Console and click like the drop down, and all I think 1,500 or whatever services that they have in there. There will be a CRD for those API endpoints in the Crossplane AWS provider.
Wow, that's awesome. So all this has been built by the open source community, or were these already available?
Yeah, and so this is the key thing, and why as a company we realized you had to open source the framework for building control planes versus have it be yet another like vendor driven solution, right? Is all of those providers are community driven and open source, and the project's goal and charter is to make it a place where not just Upbound but other vendors can collaborate on those providers as well. And so the Crossplane project has been working with AWS and Azure and Google to actually, engineers and teams in there have been collaborating in the open source to like hook up code generation pipelines that already exist for generating the CLIs and SDKs for those cloud services to also generate resources in those providers for Crossplane, so you have maximum coverage.
Awesome. Wow, sounds really amazing. What's happening, just bringing together open source and the hyperscalers, and that everyone is working together towards this. Sounds really awesome. And as we're winding down, I just wanted to ask about, you spoke a lot about Crossplane and its capabilities, and I'd like for you to just touch upon as well Upbound and what Upbound adds to what Crossplane does.
Yeah, so I mean, the short story is that Upbound is a turnkey solution for building and managing your entire platform with this control plane approach. And Crossplane is simply like a project you can use to build your own control plane. Realistically, there's a long way to go from between, building a control plane and then deploy it into production and then running a whole platform on it with users and UIs and interfaces and things like that. So it's kind of similar. You can almost think of it as a similar relationship between Kubernetes and GKE, or better one is actually Kubernetes and like Cloud Run. So Kubernetes, very few people run Kubernetes, like vanilla Kubernetes in production. Similarly, very few people should be running like cross-plane open source in production. It's what Upbound does is gives you an easy button to get a control plane deployed into production and designed in a way that to be secure, highly performant, and multi-tenant. And what our product does is gives you the ability to create like virtual control planes. And those virtual control planes allow you to run multiple control planes on one cluster. They're designed to serve like multi-tenant use cases in mind. So if you, today, if you install Crossplane in a single Kubernetes cluster and want it to talk and interact with multiple service accounts and cloud accounts, it doesn't really do that. But Upbound and our virtual control plane technology, for example, allow you to do that. And then that's like the key core of it. On top of it, we have an amazing UI and UX, like a console that you can deploy to your customers to provision the APIs you've defined with Crossplane, and audit logs, reporting, billing, cost estimation, all that stuff.
Awesome. If you could tell us a bit about even the UI, how it's different for a developer versus an operator. What do they do when they go in? What are the typical tasks they do? What do they expect?
That's a great question. The Upbound console interface is effectively designed to look and feel like your company's own custom AWS cloud console. And depending on the permissions users who have access to this UI have, they can do different things. So most users will use it just to like provision databases and other services you've defined for your company. Other users, maybe like people who are admins of the system, will also use it to like debug, same interface, different things show up. They'll use it to debug the platform. They'll use it to understand, why an application is performing incorrectly, or look at it and understand what, network settings have been consistently getting rewritten by another, process or something in the system. And so, yeah, one console, two personas, and it works. It looks and feels like your company's own AWS cloud console.
Oh, awesome. But, it adds to there's one more console to sort of log into and, keep track of and all of that. So, if, for Upbound customers, where do they spend most of their time? Is it in the Upbound console, or is it in the AWS Azure console? Or what's the split? For what kind of task do they need to go to AWS? And, if you could just share that split, because, I'm just thinking of this thing of, management complexity and how, is there too much to juggle between, if you could talk to that a bit.
Oh, totally. So the application teams and developers who are, self-servicing infrastructure with your platform spend all of their time in the Upbound console. It's super, you can control their experience, you can control what the interface looks like, and it's totally dynamically generated depending on the, those API definitions you have inside your control planes, right? Now, if you want, a lot of times actually what's interesting increasingly is like operators are also using it for debugging, because they get a single view across Azure, AWS, on-prem, whatever, of how their infrastructure is performing. But the cool thing is you can very easily, link out from the Upbound console. You can click on a link and actually be taken to, the specific resource inside of AWS. So you don't have to like, have a bunch of tabs open, or, try to map like what this thing in Upbound is and what it looks like in AWS. It just, it passes you through directly.
That's really convenient. And probably in some cases, you can even just solve the issue right from Upbound without even having to visit the AWS console, right?
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of that is because the resources you're viewing are defined and being managed in your control plane. And so if you want to change a configuration setting, all you have to do is update the configuration, deploy that into the control plane in Upbound, and the control plane manages and changes the state of the actual resource in the cloud provider.
All right, awesome. So, we spoke about a lot. We spoke about the platform model, why it's gaining traction, how customers look at it, how vendors, the open source community are coming together to solve for it. We spoke about cross-plane and just its take on the platform model, how it uses APIs, how it leverages CRDs. We spoke about Upbound and how it makes all of this really easy and just gives you a really easy to use interface that brings it all together. So I think we covered a lot, but, if you were to just summarize all of that, and if you were to probably give our listeners and our viewers just one key takeaway from all of this, what would that be?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think fundamentally boiling it all down, the reality is every company in the world is building a platform today. You probably already have one. Maybe you're building it for the first time. Maybe you're replatforming for, the 10th time or whatever, but you're building a platform. And unless you have a control plane powering that platform, you're going to find yourself building it over again. And you're going to find yourself trying to figure out how to do self-service and how to have a single pane of glass and, fundamentally how to get applications and value to your customers faster. A year from now, if you're not building on the right architecture and the right framework. And so that's just happening in the industry. We think at the very least, like Crossplane is a great framework for building that control plane and getting one of those. And then Upbound is, the turnkey solution for deploying that into production and running your entire platform with it.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Grant. That was really informative. That was really interesting. Thanks so much for just breaking all of that down. It was really awesome.
Good.
So
I enjoyed it.
Yeah, we're coming to the last segment. So we have get to know you bunch of questions, which are just fun. I love asking them. So here goes. We got about 5 of them. Okay. So the first one, one person that you can't believe you had the honor of meeting. Could be celebrity, could be someone, maybe someone you knew that you didn't, I don't know.
That's a
new one at all.
that one takes me by surprise. I think I met Bob Dole once. In passing. Very, very strange thing, but I was much younger, obviously, and met him. But that's maybe the most famous person I've ever met.
Okay, sorry, I don't know who Bob Dole is. Forgive me.
Oh, he was I think he was a senator, like a presidential candidate in like the mid 90s. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Wow. Okay. So do you follow politics closely?
I try not to. No.
Okay. All right. So if the next one for you, if you wrote a book, its title would be?
How to move fast and not break as many things.
All right. Yeah. That's a pretty good title, actually. So we just briefly chatting before the interview, and I found out that you're into dogs. So your favorite dog breed?
Oh, golden retriever.
Oh, that was quick.
That one's easy. That one's easy.
All right. Did you have one yourself at any point?
No, but I have a lot of friends and everything that do, some family that does as well. And honestly, some of the nicest dogs in the world. Super fun
friendly.
Friendly, very friendly.
Yeah. All right. Your favorite productivity hack?
A tool called Roam Research.
Okay,
it's like
not heard of it.
It's like a note-taking tool, basically, is the way to think of it. Yeah.
So what's it called again? Roam
Research. Yeah. It's research, I don't think I could do my job with it, or without it rather.
Interesting. I'm going to check it out. Wow. All right. One habit or skill or achievement of yours that you picked up or you achieved during the pandemic?
I learned how to cook more homemade meals. I've not
Wow.
mastered that skill, but I can cook a handful of things without much supervision.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, you got to tell us one example of what you can cook.
Well, I mean, we were starting before at a really low bar of sandwiches and salads, and so we graduated to mushroom risotto and like a chickpea curry soup type of thing.
Ah, sounds delicious. Wow. Yeah, so that's about the questions we had for you. Lastly, just wanted to know, where do we find you online? How do we connect with you?
So I'm mostly on Strava. That's like the social media I use the most. Big cyclist here. But if you want to follow the company on Twitter, at Upbound_IO is the account to follow. I also have a Twitter account, Grant Gumina on Twitter, but I don't tweet a lot. Good or bad thing. You'll hear a lot of product announcements from me and not much else.
Yeah, lots happening at Twitter right now, actually. Let's see how that goes down.
Yeah.
But yeah, just a pleasure talking to you, Grant. Thanks so much for just sharing so much information and just being really fun to talk to. Really enjoyed having you over on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much, Twain. Really appreciated this.
All right. And all of our listeners and viewers, thank you so much for tuning in. And if you like more of these kind of in-depth tech discussions on the space, the cloud native Kubernetes space, I want to encourage you to head over to amazic.com. That's where we post all of this good stuff. There's articles, there's videos, there's job listings, events, there's a whole lot more happening. So go and check it out, and you definitely love visiting there. So that's it. Signing off now. This is Twain, and thanks again, Grant. It was great having you. All right, guys. See you on the next podcast. Bye-bye.